The laughter echoed through the grand chamber of the Galactic Empire, a sound that would haunt humanity's memory for generations to come. Ambassador Chen stood before the assembled delegates of 300 civilizations, her hands trembling slightly as she held up the holographic projection of Earth's first faster-than-light prototype. The vessel looked primitive by galactic standards. Angular where other ships curved, bulky where others streamlined, festooned with what the Empire's engineers dismissively called chemical propulsion backups, as if humanity didn't trust its own technology. The Valdari High Commander, his 6 eyes gleaming with barely concealed contempt, leaned forward in his crystalline throne. "This," he said, his voice dripping with condescension that the translators rendered in 1,000 languages simultaneously, "is what the humans offer as their contribution to the Empire's defense fleet?" The mockery spread like wildfire through the chamber. The Syntherian delegation, beings of pure energy contained in diplomatic shells, pulsed with what their species considered amusement. The Krelith Warcast, massive reptilian warriors who had conquered 40 systems, let out barking laughs that echoed off the vaulted ceilings. Even the normally reserved Etherian scholars couldn't suppress their derision, their telepathic whispers filling the minds of every delegate with images of humanity's technological inadequacy. Ambassador Chen felt the weight of Earth's hopes crushing down on her shoulders. She had been chosen for this mission because of her unshakable composure, her brilliant diplomatic record, her ability to maintain dignity under pressure. But standing here, watching 300 civilizations mock her species' best efforts, she felt something ancient and primal stirring in her chest, the same stubborn defiance that had driven humanity to split the atom, to walk on the moon, to reach for the stars when every rational analysis said they should stay home. "Honored delegates," she began, her voice steady despite the humiliation burning in her veins. "I understand that our technology appears rudimentary compared to your achievements. We are, as you've repeatedly reminded us, the newest members of the galactic community. We've had faster-than-light capability for less than a decade, while some of you have wielded it for millennia." She paused, letting that sink in, watching the smugness settle more deeply into their alien features. "But I would remind you that humanity has a particular talent. We are very, very good at learning from our mistakes. And we're even better at proving people wrong." The Valdari High Commander waved a dismissive appendage. "Your prototype is rejected, Ambassador. The Empire has standards. We cannot compromise our fleet's effectiveness by including vessels that belong in a museum of primitive technology. Perhaps in another century, when your species has matured, you may try again." The rejection was absolute, final, delivered with the casual cruelty of those who had never known defeat. Earth's application to contribute to the Empire's defense initiative was denied. The prototype ship, humanity's pride, the vessel that represented a decade of research and the combined efforts of Earth's brightest minds, was dismissed as worthless. Ambassador Chen bowed formally, maintained her composure through the endless diplomatic protocols, and returned to her ship with her delegation. Only when the doors sealed behind her did she allow herself to show emotion. Her chief engineer, Dr. Marcus Rodriguez, was already pulling up the schematics. "They rejected it," she said, her voice hollow. Marcus looked up, and there was something dangerous in his eyes. "Good," he said quietly. "Then they won't see what's coming." The Frontier Station received the distress call 3 months after Ambassador Chen's humiliation before the Grand Chamber. It came from the outer reaches, the contested zone where the Galactic Empire's borders met the territory of the Krell Dominion, a hostile power that had been testing Imperial defenses for years. The message was fragmentary, broken by interference and panic, but the core information was clear. A Krell invasion fleet, 200 warships strong, had crossed into Imperial space. They were moving toward the populated systems of the inner territories, and the Empire's defenders were falling back in disarray. The Valdari High Commander convened an emergency session of the Grand Chamber, his 6 eyes no longer gleaming with amusement, but with genuine concern bordering on fear. "The Krell have committed forces far beyond our intelligence estimates," he announced to the assembled delegates. The chamber erupted into chaos. Species that had existed in peace for centuries suddenly faced the prospect of annihilation. The Syntherians, who had mocked humanity's primitive technology, now scrambled to relocate their energy matrices to secure locations. The Krellith Warcast, for all their boasting, admitted that their forces were already engaged on other fronts and couldn't be redeployed in time. The Empire, that magnificent alliance of 300 civilizations spanning a quarter of the galaxy, was paralyzed by bureaucracy and fear. Every species had protocols to follow, councils to consult, risk assessments to complete before committing forces. While they debated and delayed, the Krell fleet advanced, leaving shattered worlds and dead stars in their wake. The reports that filtered back to the Grand Chamber grew increasingly desperate. Entire planetary defense networks overwhelmed in minutes, Imperial dreadnoughts torn apart by weapons that seemed to ignore conventional shielding, populations evacuated in panic only to be caught by Krell raiders in the interstellar void. It was the Etherian scholar delegate who first mentioned Earth. "The humans," she said during a brief lull in the panicked discussions, her telepathic voice cutting through the mental noise. "They offered us a ship. We rejected it." The Valdari High Commander's response was immediate and sharp. "That primitive vessel would be useless against the Krell. It would be destroyed in seconds. The humans themselves acknowledged their technological inferiority." But the Etherian persisted, her thoughts carrying a weight that demanded attention. "The humans have one advantage that we've overlooked in our arrogance. They're not part of our command structure. They don't need approval from the Grand Chamber. They don't have protocols preventing immediate action. And most importantly, they have nothing to lose. We've already rejected them, already made clear they're not truly part of the Empire. What if we asked them anyway?" The silence that followed was profound. The idea was desperate, almost insulting, to ask the species they'd mocked just 3 months ago to save them from a threat that had destroyed the Empire's finest warships. But desperation has a way of cutting through pride, and the reports from the frontier were growing worse by the hour. The Valdari High Commander made the decision that would define his legacy. "Contact Earth," he commanded. Tell them we were wrong. Tell them we need their help." The message reached Earth within hours, transmitted on emergency channels with a priority that made clear the severity of the situation. It found Ambassador Chen in Geneva, working late in her office at the United Earth Space Command headquarters. She read it 3 times, feeling emotions war within her chest. Vindication, anger, bitter satisfaction, and beneath it all, the same stubborn determination that had carried her through the humiliation in the Grand Chamber. She could reject them now. She could let the Empire face the consequences of their arrogance. She could watch 300 civilizations burn for the sin of underestimating humanity. But that wasn't who humans were. That wasn't why they'd reached for the stars. Chin picked up her comm unit and made a call that connected her to a secret facility in the Nevada desert, a place that officially didn't exist and housed a project that officially had been terminated after the Empire's rejection. "Dr. Rodriguez," she said when the connection established, "it's time. Prep the Prometheus. We're going to war." There was a pause on the other end, and she could almost see Marcus's expression, that same dangerous look he'd worn when the prototype was rejected. "The Prometheus isn't a prototype anymore, Ambassador," he said quietly. "After the rejection, we rebuilt her, improved her. We made something that the Empire has never seen. When do we launch?" Chin looked out her window at the lights of Geneva, thinking of all the cities like it across Earth, all the human lives that had nothing to do with the Empire's politics or their cosmic arrogance. Immediately, she said, "And Marcus? Make them remember. Make them remember that they laughed at us." The Prometheus launched from the Nevada facility under a moonless sky, her engines burning with a light that seemed to challenge the stars themselves. She was no longer the prototype that had been presented to the Grand Chamber. That vessel had been dismantled, studied, and rebuilt from the ground up by engineers who had taken the Empire's rejection personally. Dr. Marcus Rodriguez stood in the command center, watching the Earth fall away through the view screen, and felt the weight of human pride and human defiance humming through every system of the ship he'd spent 3 months perfecting. The official story was that the prototype project had been terminated, the resources redirected, the dream abandoned. The truth was that humanity had done what it always did when told something was impossible. They'd worked harder, pushed further, and refused to accept limitations imposed by others. The crew of the Prometheus numbered just 50 souls, handpicked from Earth's military and scientific elite. Captain Sarah Chin, no relation to the ambassador, though they shared the same stubborn determination, stood at her station reviewing the tactical data streaming in from Imperial sources. The Krell fleet was a hammer falling toward the core worlds, and the Empire's defenses were shattering like glass. 200 warships, each one larger than a city, equipped with weapons that turned planets to cinder, and shields that conventional firepower couldn't penetrate. The Empire's admirals were calling for evacuations, for retreat, for any strategy that didn't involve direct confrontation with such overwhelming force. "ETA to the combat zone?" Captain Chen asked, her voice calm despite the impossible odds they were about to face. Her navigation officer, Lieutenant James Park, checked his console and shook his head. "At conventional FTL speeds, 40 hours. We arrive after the core systems fall." The captain smiled, and it was not a kind expression. "Who said anything about conventional speeds? Engage the Rodriguez drive." The Rodriguez drive was humanity's secret, the innovation that Marcus and his team had developed in the bitter aftermath of rejection. The Empire's faster-than-light technology was based on dimensional folding, elegant and efficient but bound by fundamental limitations that their science had accepted as universal constants. Humanity, with its characteristic refusal to accept that anything was truly impossible, had approached the problem differently. They didn't fold space, they tore through it. The Prometheus shuddered as the drive engaged, reality warping around her hull in ways that made the sensors scream warnings. The ship wasn't traveling through normal space, or even through the dimensional shortcuts that the Empire used. She was taking a route that conventional physics said didn't exist, exploiting quantum uncertainties and probability fields that more advanced species had dismissed as theoretical curiosities with no practical application. The crew felt it in their bones, in their teeth, a vibration that existed on the edge of perception and suggested they were traveling through spaces that sapient minds weren't meant to comprehend. "Time to combat zone?" Captain Chen asked again. Lieutenant Park stared at his console as if it had personally offended him, ran the calculations twice more, then looked up with an expression caught between exhilaration and terror. 90 minutes, Captain. We're moving at speeds that the computer keeps flagging this as an error. We're going too fast. According to known physics, we can't be going this fast." Marcus Rodriguez, monitoring the drive systems from the engineering deck, allowed himself a grim smile. The Empire had laughed at humanity's primitive technology, never understanding that sometimes primitive meant unburdened by assumptions about what was possible. They had centuries of established science telling them what couldn't be done. Humanity had desperation, creativity, and a fundamental unwillingness to accept limitations. The Rodriguez drive was inefficient, dangerous, and violated approximately 17 laws of physics that the Empire considered fundamental. It was also going to get them to the battle in time to make a difference. The Prometheus dropped out of her impossible speed at the edge of the combat zone, her sensors immediately painting a picture of devastation. The Krell fleet was there, massive wedge-shaped vessels that looked like they'd been designed by beings who understood that terror was a weapon as effective as any gun. They moved in perfect formation, their weapons tearing through Imperial defenses with casual efficiency. Defending them were the scattered remnants of 3 Imperial battle groups. Ships that had been beautiful once, elegant expressions of their creators' aesthetics, now burning wrecks tumbling through the void. The communication channels were chaos, 100 species screaming for help in 100 languages, all of them drowning beneath the inexorable advance of the Krell hammer. Captain Chun opened a channel to the Imperial command structure, broadcasting on all emergency frequencies. "This is Captain Sarah Chun of the Earth vessel Prometheus to Imperial forces. We're here to help. We're engaging the enemy fleet." The response came from a Valdari admiral whose ship was already venting atmosphere. "One ship? You brought one ship? Retreat while you can, humans. This isn't your fight. We were wrong to ask you to." Chun cut him off. "With respect, Admiral, we didn't come here because you asked. We came here because it's the right thing to do. Now watch and learn something about human engineering." The Prometheus dove into the Krell fleet like a hawk striking a flock of crows, and what happened next would be analyzed by military historians for centuries. The Empire's ships fought with grace and precision, their weapons elegant solutions to the problem of warfare, their tactics refined over millennia of experience. The Krell fought with overwhelming power, their weapons so devastating that defense was futile and survival meant not being hit in the first place. Humanity fought like they'd been fighting since the first primate picked up a rock, with creativity, aggression, and a complete disregard for the established rules of engagement. The Prometheus's weapon systems were a nightmare of human innovation, each one representing a different approach to the fundamental problem of making enemy ships stop existing. She carried railguns that fired projectiles at percentages of light speed that made the laws of relativity weep. She mounted missile systems that didn't just explode on impact but released swarms of smaller munitions that thought for themselves and chose their own targets. And at her core, she carried something that Dr. Rodriguez had named the Entropy Lance, a weapon based on principles that the Empire's physicists had dismissed as theoretical impossibilities. The first Krell battleship died without understanding what had killed it. The Prometheus flickered into existence less than 1,000 kilometers from its hull, close enough that conventional tactics would have left both ships as debris, and fired the Entropy Lance. The beam that emerged wasn't coherent energy like a laser or a plasma bolt. It was a focused stream of thermodynamic inevitability, a weapon that weaponized the heat death of the universe and compressed it into a 10-second burst. Where it touched the Krell ship's shields, those shields didn't fail, they aged. Centuries of decay happened in seconds, exotic particles breaking down into simpler forms, complex energy matrices simplifying into random heat. The shields collapsed not from damage but from entropy, and when the lance touched the hull beyond, the same process repeated. Metal oxidized, composites delaminate, fusion reactors went critical as their containment fields decayed beyond their ability to maintain coherence. The Krell battleship didn't explode so much as simply come apart. 3 billion tons of warship reduced to its component atoms across 15 seconds of impossible physics. The Krell fleet's response was immediate and overwhelming. 20 ships shifted their formation, bringing weapons to bear on this upstart human vessel that dared to challenge them. Their guns spoke with voices that could crack planets, energy weapons that operated in spectrums that human eyes couldn't perceive and human physics barely understood. Enough firepower to vaporize a moon converged on the Prometheus's position, and for a moment, the Imperial forces watching thought they'd just witnessed humanity's brave but futile last stand. Then the Prometheus simply wasn't there anymore. The Rodriguez drive didn't just allow for fast interstellar travel. It allowed for tactical jumps that made conventional evasion look like standing still. The ship flickered in and out of normal space like a ghost, never staying in one location long enough for the Krell targeting systems to achieve a lock. She appeared above the fleet, fired the entropy lance, and vanished before the return fire arrived. She materialized below them, launched a swarm of self-guided munitions, and disappeared into impossible spaces before the explosions even registered on sensors. She fought like no ship the galaxy had ever seen, because she fought like humans fought, unpredictably, aggressively, with a complete willingness to take insane risks if it meant accomplishing the objective. The Krell fleet commander, a being whose species had conquered 40 star systems through superior firepower and unshakable confidence in their military supremacy, made a decision that would haunt his species' military academies. He ordered 60 ships to focus exclusively on destroying the single human vessel, dedicating nearly a third of his fleet to eliminating what he saw as an annoying pest. It was exactly what Captain Chen had been counting on. All Imperial forces, she broadcast on the emergency channels, her voice cutting through the chaos of battle. The Krell have committed 60 vessels to pursuing us. That leaves 140 ships in their main formation. They've broken their defensive posture. They've created gaps. Exploit them. Now! For a moment, there was stunned silence on the Imperial channels. Then a Valdari admiral, the same one who had told the Prometheus to retreat, let out a sound that the translators rendered as something between a laugh and a war cry. "All ships!" he commanded, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had just remembered why his species had conquered stars. "You heard the human. Attack! Attack! Show these Krell bastards what happens when you underestimate the Empire." The battle that followed would be remembered as the turning of Prometheus, the moment when the certain fall of the Empire's core worlds became instead a desperate but winnable fight. The Imperial ships, given hope by humanity's audacity, pressed their advantage against the Krell's broken formation. They fought with renewed determination, their crews understanding that if one primitive human ship could defy an enemy that had seemed invincible, then perhaps the Empire itself could survive. The Prometheus led 60 Krell ships on a chase through impossible spaces, flickering in and out of reality, bleeding from a dozen wounds, but refusing to die. Captain Chen sat in her command chair, watching her crew work with the precision of people who knew they were writing history. "Engineering," she called down to Marcus. "How's the Rodriguez drive holding up?" The response came back with a laugh that sounded slightly unhinged. "She's running at 215% of theoretical maximum capacity, Captain. The physics models say she should have torn herself apart 17 jumps ago. I think she's too stubborn to die." Chen smiled. "Just like her builders. Keep her together, Marcus. We're not done yet." The Prometheus had been fighting for 3 hours when her luck finally ran out. She destroyed 11 Krell battleships, crippled another 17, and led the enemy fleet on a chase that had pulled them so far from their original formation that the Imperial forces had managed to regroup and counterattack. But the Rodriguez drive, pushed far beyond any sane operational parameters, was beginning to fail. The jumps were becoming less precise, the intervals between them growing longer, and Captain Chen could feel her ship struggling like a living thing pushed past endurance. "Engineering," she called, knowing the answer before she asked the question. "Can we make one more jump?" Marcus Rodriguez's voice came back, and there was something final in it. "Maybe, Captain. Maybe." but I can't guarantee we have enough power to jump out again. We'd be dead in space, and there are still 40 Krell ships hunting us. Chen looked at her tactical display, watching the dance of forces across the combat zone. The Imperial fleet was winning now, pressing their advantage against a Krell force that had been fragmented and demoralized by humanity's defiance. But 40 Krell ships, if allowed to rejoin the main battle, could still turn the tide. She made the decision that every captain dreads and every captain knows might one day be necessary. Then we make them count, she said quietly. One more jump. Put us right in the middle of their formation. We'll use everything we have left, every missile, every railgun, every ounce of power in the Entropy Lance. We'll hurt them so badly that the Imperial forces can finish the job. Her crew looked at her, understanding what she was ordering, understanding that this was almost certainly a one-way trip. Lieutenant Park spoke for all of them when he said simply, "It's been an honor, Captain." The final jump was both beautiful and terrible, the Prometheus materializing in the exact geometric center of the Krell hunting pack, surrounded on all sides by ships that outmassed her 100 to 1. But she appeared among them, not at a safe distance, and at this range even the Krell's superior shields couldn't save them. The Prometheus fired everything. Railguns spoke with voices like thunder, sending tungsten slugs through hulls at velocities that turned kinetic energy into apocalypse. Missiles launched in swarms, each one a thinking weapon that chose its target and executed its purpose with mechanical precision. The Entropy Lance, powered by every remaining joule of energy in the ship's core, fired continuously, sweeping through the Krell formation like a scythe through wheat. Ships aged and died, their shields failing, their hulls decomposing, their crews dying without ever understanding what impossible weapon was ending their existence. The Prometheus died too, of course. The return fire was overwhelming, inevitable, the price that had to be paid for getting close enough to make every shot count. Her shields failed first, then her armor, then her hull. Captain Chen felt her ship dying around her and reached out to activate the final protocol. A message beacon, a black box designed to survive what the ship itself could not. "This is Captain Sarah Chen of the Earth vessel Prometheus," she recorded, her voice steady even as explosions tore through the deck around her. "To anyone who finds this beacon, we came to help. We fought as hard as we could. Tell Earth that the Prometheus did not die alone. Tell them we took 40 Krell ships with us. Tell them." The recording ended there, cut off by the catastrophic failure of the ship's power core. The Prometheus became a new star in the darkness, her reactor breach so brilliant that it was visible from the inhabited world she died to protect. The shockwave caught 3 more Krell ships, damaging them badly enough that Imperial forces finished them minutes later. And in the silence that followed, as the battle wound down to its inevitable conclusion, with the Krell fleet broken and retreating, the Imperial forces found themselves staring at where a human ship had been. The Valdari admiral was the one who finally broke the stunned silence. "Get rescue teams to those coordinates," he commanded. "If there are survivors, we bring them home. We owe them that much. We owe them everything." The search and rescue operation found the beacon 4 hours later, broadcasting its final message to the void. They found debris that had once been the pride of human engineering. They found scorch marks in space itself, where the Prometheus had made her last stand. What they didn't find were bodies. The explosion had been too complete, the destruction too absolute. Humanity's first contribution to the Empire's defense had ceased to exist in any material sense, reduced to atoms and memories, and a beacon that kept broadcasting Captain Chen's last words on an endless loop. The Grand Chamber convened 1 week after the Battle of Prometheus, and the atmosphere was very different from the last time Earth had been discussed. 300 civilizations stood in silence as Ambassador Chen walked to the central podium, no longer supplicant, but honored guest. The Valdari High Commander descended from his crystalline throne and did something that shocked every delegate present. He knelt. "On behalf of the Galactic Empire," he said, his voice carrying none of the contempt it had held 3 months ago, "I apologize. We judged you by our standards and found you wanting. We failed to see that your strength lay not in having the same technology as us, but in your willingness to use what you had in ways we would never have imagined. Your ship, your crew, your Captain Chen and her 50 souls, they saved billions of lives. They turned a certain defeat into an unlikely victory. They proved that advancement is not measured in years, but in courage." Ambassador Chen accepted the apology with grace, though her heart ached for the cousin she'd lost aboard the Prometheus. "The Galactic Empire laughed at our prototype," she said, her voice carrying to every corner of the vast chamber. "You mocked our primitive technology and our audacity in thinking we could contribute to your magnificent fleet. You were right to laugh. That prototype was inadequate for your standards. But you made one crucial error in your assessment. You judged the ship and ignored the people who built it. You saw our technological limitations and failed to recognize our greatest strength, our refusal to accept that any problem is unsolvable. Humanity doesn't build ships to meet existing standards. We build ships to exceed them. And when you tell us something is impossible, we make it our mission to prove you wrong." She paused, and when she continued, there was steel in her voice that made 300 civilizations pay attention. "The Prometheus is gone, but her sacrifice bought Earth something more valuable than your acceptance. It bought us your respect, and it bought us time to finish the ships we're building to replace her. Ships that learn from the Prometheus's battle. Ships that incorporate everything we discovered while you were laughing at us. I'm pleased to inform this august body that the Prometheus was not a prototype. She was proof of concept. The real fleet is launching next month. 50 ships, each one carrying the name of a crew member who died to save you. And they will not be primitive. They will not be inadequate. They will be human. And that, honored delegates, will be enough." The silence that followed was absolute, broken finally by something that had never happened in the Grand Chamber's 3,000-year history. The Krelith Warcast, the species that respected only strength and had mocked humanity most loudly, stood and began to beat their chests in their traditional salute to worthy warriors. The gesture spread like wildfire through the chamber. Species that had never agreed on anything united in honoring the sacrifice of beings they dismissed as primitive. Ambassador Chen stood at the podium, watching 300 civilizations acknowledge what humanity had paid to prove their worth, and felt tears streaming down her face. The Galactic Empire had laughed at Earth's prototypes. One ship had wiped out their mockery, rewritten their understanding of courage, and earned humanity a place among the stars not through supplication, but through sacrifice. The Prometheus was gone, but her legacy would burn bright enough to light humanity's path forward for generations to come. And Earth would remember. Earth would build. And Earth would never, ever stop proving people wrong.